Hello everyone and welcome back to this video. So to continue on kind of with our series, we talked about in our first video kind of an introduction to the Banner Engineering XS26 series safety controller and some of its inner workings. In this particular video we're going to go through kind of the physical safety inputs as well as some of the safety outputs, and maybe not how to configure them necessarily, but kind of talking more about what they particularly are and how they work. So as I mentioned in the previous video, you have the opportunity to go ahead and click this button and add your safety devices here. Um, my personal preference is to go to the functional view and add them there. And so that's kind of, again, my personal preference, so that's where I'm going to go to add them. So another key feature that I kind of forgot to mention in our previous video is when you get to the functional view, you have the opportunity to add multiple pages, to track multiple pages, or the system will add them depending on how many outputs you have as it sees fit for the need. So you have, again, if you come up over here to the upper right corner, you can see it fit the size as in the page. You can subtract it so you can see more. You can zoom in a little bit. You can go to your next page by clicking the next arrow, clicking the back arrow to the first page. You also have to drop down to select what pages you want. Should you need to add a page, you can click add page. Delete a page, you can delete a page. You can't delete a page that the program says you need to have. So in our case, because we have a secondary output controller with 4 dual channel outputs, the system requires us to have up to 3 pages, because on page 2 it's going to see it as output 1 and 2, and then page 3 is going to see it as outputs 3 and 4, and page 1 is going to be the standard controller. So back to our inputs that we were kind of talking about. I'm going to go ahead and click on the plus arrow on the very first one up here, and we see that we have kind of some set inputs that the system knows that we're going to have, more than likely. So traditionally, most control systems will always have an emergency stop. So clicking on the emergency stop, we can see that we have kind of the standard emergency stop that the system thinks that we would have, which would be kind of an input or a power output in a sense to the normally close contact, and then to an input. And this is designed exactly as the way that we would see it. This is giving us IO1, which is it's a input or a non-safety power monitor output from the controller itself. So the controller has the option to have a handful of inputs or output contacts that do both. So we have the opportunity to set those up that way. Excuse me. Now traditionally, I prefer to have 24 volts DC coming in as a positive line coming in, and going through my normally close contact. So by scrolling up and down, I get to have the opportunity to change what type of diagram or what type of wiring that I'm physically using. I could set it to a dual channel PNP connection. Going up, I could set it so that only one single output is used to 2 different inputs. That would serve its purposes quite well in a lot of applications if you have several emergency stops that you want to tie in. Again, this is my personal favorite right here, is the dual channel single 24 volt power coming in, and then to the dual channel as well as to the inputs. You do also have the opportunity to change the input that you would want to use should you need to do that for any reason, or should you want to do that for any particular reason. You have the opportunity to change the name minus what the physical input that the controller says that it's going to be. I believe that there's only a 15 character max right here, so just the FYI and heads up. You could change it to a single channel PNP, single channel 2 terminal, so the single IO'd output to input, or you could do a single channel normally closed 24 to input through the normally closed contact on your emergency stop button. I'm going to go ahead and use my traditional favorite, which is the dual channel 2 terminal with a 24 volts DC input power. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So it sets my first e-stop into the system right here. and we go from there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go add another input. Now, traditionally, in an older traditional sense, a lot of us would have wired our emergency stops, our door interlocks, etc. in series with the controller or the safety relay, etc. In the time frame, in the era that we now live in, if you will, with using a safety PLC, we could now parallel all of that stuff into a separate input. So we can run 24 volts DC power to all of our e-stops, all of that, and we can run separate individual e-stops back into the controller. So we might have, say, 2 e-stops on the control system, and we're going to go ahead and set them to be 2 separate e-stops into the system. So say we have 10 e-stops, we can bring all 10 e-stops into the system as well. Which, from a troubleshooter standpoint, this is the handiest system in the world versus the single series ran input wires, because now we've got to go trace through every single one of those 10 e-stops. Now we only have the single e-stop. We're able to see which one it actually is. In addition to e-stops, a lot of times we'll see gate switches, so door interlocks, etc. So by clicking on the gate switch, traditionally we could have all kinds of different gate switch setups, but traditionally, again, gate switches are normally programmed or wired the same way that emergency stops are. So very similar to that, we kind of scroll through and we can see some of the traditional ways that we would have seen that. We also have the opportunity here to have those particular gate switches that have a normally open and a normally closed contact that are monitoring that, so the system is able to understand that could potentially be a type of gate switch that you would have. Again, does the same thing, allows us to have that I/O sending power to us. We could also do the gate switch that has all 4 of those contacts, where you have the 2 normally open, 2 normally closed, that are all transferred by the action of the interlock, if you will, on the gate switch itself. Again, I'm going to use the more traditional one, that's the 2 normally closed with 24 volts DC power coming in for my particular gate switch. And I'm going to go ahead and add a second one of those just so we have something to work with in upcoming videos. We also have the option to add maybe like an optical sensor. So for instance, and this is again the traditional input, and I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at that. This would be something kind of like a light curtain that you might have within your safety control system as well. Once again, very similar contacts as well. I'm going to go ahead and leave it as a dual channel PNP because that's usually what I would work with on my end. Rope pulls, safety mats, protective stops, most of those are all going to be kind of a similarity that most of us have worked with before. They're going to be very similar to the emergency stop, gate switch, and optical switches. Two-hand control, I will add one of those in here and go ahead and leave it as a dual system. One other thing we can do is we can drag and drop to a different spot should we need to move them around. In fact, I might go ahead and drag and drop these all to kind of space them out just a little bit for future use. Two-hand control we'll talk a little bit about more in a later video, but those require a little bit more of sensitive programming as to how they're working. Some other items that we can use in here is we can do maybe like muting should we need to mute something along the way. We can mute a sensor pair, which is kind of a critical thing. So a lot of times with like an optical sensor, we'll use a muting function here. We can use like a bypass switch, which a lot of times you'd kind of consider those with your enabling devices as well. Foot pedal. Foot pedals can sometimes be considered kind of along the lines of your two-hand control. Just depends on how you're using them. The one other thing that I really definitely want to add to our program here that we kind of want to go over is a manual reset button. Considered like a non-safety item, but nevertheless will still go into a normal input. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, give me that, and it's going to go ahead and space it out for me anyway. The other thing I want to go ahead and do here is I want to split my outputs. So I'm going to go ahead and split it, and then I'm going to go ahead and split the other one as well. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and add a fault reset to all of them, and we will talk a little bit more about their usage and how to connect all of this in our next video. So thank you all for watching, and stay tuned to our next video.